Hey everyone, welcome to the StoryMaking Show. I'm Jim Woods and I am here with Todd Foley. Todd is an author, a screenwriter, a freelance writer, and honestly, too, one of my best friends. Todd, thanks so much for being with me.
Thanks, Jim. Huge honor to be here. Really excited.
When I had the opportunity to talk stories with you, Todd, I was like, oh yeah, we'll do this anyway. We'll do this not with a camera, so why not invite others into the conversation? Now, you've written 4 books, correct? I think actually 5 if you include your co-authoring book,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you've
So four novels and then one co-authored kind of, just nonfiction co-write.
right, but mostly you have 4 novels that you've published. They're available. You really are hard to nail down as far as genre because I'm kind of like I'm stumbling here. I'm like, what genre would I say?
Yeah. No, that's true. I think that, when I first put out my first novel, Eastbound Sailing, about 10 years ago, actually, this September is when it came out, which is nuts. Feeling old when I say that. I think that I was really trying to take myself super seriously with it. At the time, it was absolutely put out my best work at the time of what it was, my best efforts. And I loved that. I think that I thought, oh, serious writing has to be sad writing. And
Okay.
I had that kind of misconception in my head. And then I think kind of my genres evolved as my consumption tastes evolved too. And then I thought,
Sure.
I think that serious writing is like more dark writing. So I kind of took a bit of a darker turn with Charades, which was my second one, which was an absolute blast to read or to write it and to
Very
kind of
morbid.
hear,
Fun.
very more, to like especially like hearing people's reactions to it. Hearing a reader's reaction or an audience reaction is it's what I'm most scared to always hear, but it's also the most exciting thing.
Yeah.
And like if it made you mad, if it made you happy, if it made you, if I evoked some kind of a emotional response or reaction,
Right.
I think I did my job as a storyteller.
Yeah, I remember that now because
Yeah,
that one you brought me back just when you said the title. I was like, oh wow, because
yeah,
that book really blew me away. It really subverted expectations, and I would
hmm
almost throw that one in like crime genre,
hmm
but no one reading it is going to remotely think that until they finish it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the whole, the subverting expectations, I think I try to do that. I don't know, and that's something I struggle with too, because I'm like, oh, well then, like my goal is never to have it, where the audience can kind of guess the twist of what it's
Okay.
going to be, like a twist just for the sake of being a twist.
Mhm.
And then I think a few years later, um, that's when I think I was just starting to consume more things that were fun to
Mhm.
consume. So I think I started chasing the fun more.
Okay.
And I think that was like my light bulb that really opened up a lot more floodgates for me with creatively.
Yeah. Can you
I think,
elaborate on that? What does chasing the fun
yeah.
look like to you? Because you're like, okay, I was real serious and then I started
Mhm.
chasing the fun. What does
Yeah,
fun consist of
that's
for you?
true. Yeah, fun is a very vague word. I think that um, it was the most that I enjoyed the
Okay.
writing process too,
Mhm.
and I think I took some more. So and you actually had a pretty instrumental piece, a role in helping shape that book, for sure. Love is love, or something like it.
Love or something like it.
Yeah,
We kind of said it was like a twisted romantic version of Pulp Fiction.
yeah. Sort of like a really twisted, tangled story about love, but not a love story. Kind of
Right.
was where it kind of boiled down to. So, just for context, it's 7 short stories that are all
Uh-huh.
kind of interwoven. So it's a big web. So I think that was we hopped onto a Zoom call or whatever tech we were using back then,
Right.
and I said, "This is my map. I don't know how to. I know it's got to. These things have to link together. Can you help me with this? Because all I have is an ugly Venn
Yeah.
diagram." And I remember you were kind of doing like live drawings. Okay, well, this and this and this, and that was. I remember I was terrified to put it out because I thought, oh, I am having so much fun with this one. I'm like,
It was
what if
really,
I
really fun.
completely missed the connections?
Yeah. That one was that's one of my favorites, Todd, because it's so ambitious. It's so ambitious when you're, bringing together that many characters. And once I saw you do it, I was like, I think I could do that. It opens up more creativity and more fun. And you're never going to get bored if you're bringing that many little stories to the table. You're not like you cannot overanalyze because you're bringing it's like I have a buffet of characters and stories in front of me. I guess you could overanalyze if you hopped around a bunch, but it was almost like, okay, I'm hungry. I'm gonna make a good meal. I'm gonna pick some of this and this and this, and that's how I feel like it came together on this big beautiful plate. And
that was the hardest thing too, because I'm like, this doesn't really, and I'm not trying to say, not in a pretentious way at all, but I'm like, it doesn't really have a genre, because there was one that was kind of there was kind of a devastating one. There was a bit of a crime one, a mystery, and then just kind of straight up comedy, and then almost young adult romance at the end.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, these really don't fit together, but they did. And I think that's what made it fun, was I didn't let it box myself in as much.
It was so cinematic as well, and so visual. And as I've seen you grow as a writer, it was like, okay, novel, novella, nonfiction. I think that was your hinge moment, because what did you do after Love or Something Like It? What did you start pursuing?
Well, that was there was one kind of central story and it's kind of like the geeky trope where I was driving, my commute home from work at the time was 15 minutes. It was a beautiful sunny day. Katy Perry was on the radio. It was Teenage Dream. I'm like, this is such a happy song. And I'm like, what would be something really dark, juxtaposed against a bright sunny song like this?
Yeah.
A little hook came to my mind. I went back, quickly made a few notes on my phone, and then had to go to daycare, get my daughters. And my wife, she was working in evening at the time. And I'm like, I've got to write this draft. I have it here.
Yeah.
And it was a crappy first draft, but that kind of became the central story that Love or Something Like It built around. It was my favorite one I'd ever run. It was probably one of the darkest ones I had done too. And the most feedback that I got was, oh, I wanted more of her story. Of this character. I'm like,
the femme fatale, I guess, is the best way to phrase it, right?
Totally, yeah. And then I thought, well, I'm like, I think I've kind of I'm done with it. And it did feel kind of like you said, it had that potential, this cinematic kind of potential with it. So I thought, well, I feel like this could make a good movie. I know nothing about screenwriting. I said, so I kind of so I got a book from the library, which now I can't remember. I think it was Robert McKee.
The Story.
Yes. Writing Pictures, I think.
Okay, Writing Pictures. Yeah, you mentioned that one to me.
And that was I'd never taken any kind of screenwriting course, anything. Typical newbie thought of oh, maybe I could do that, without realizing how hard it is. And I started fleshing it out as kind of a long synopsis of the story. I'm like, oh, this actually has a lot of legs to it.
Right.
Pitched it to someone that I knew, and they said, oh yeah, I think this has legs. Would you be open to someone else writing it? And I was like, sure. I'm like, I just want this story to be told.
Yeah.
That kind of fizzled out, and I thought, well, I know the story better than anyone else of what I want it to be. Maybe I should start writing it. So I did. I started just studying the craft, watching movies completely differently. Way beyond just what characters did and what they said.
Right.
And then when it came time to writing it, it was just completely rewiring my brain, because I'm used to, the novel approach. You have paragraphs of exposition and internal dialogue going on and all these things that I'm like, none of that exists on a script. All of it is, subtext, show, don't tell. So that was a huge, my first draft of that was pretty horrific, but I kept refining it, and got some really good reader feedback, and it's kind of become my. I think I've done about 4 feature screenplays now that I've written, and that one it got in the quarterfinals at the Awesome Film Festival
Yeah, it's
script
huge
competition. So that was like the first time I'd ever had any kind of
exposure to it.
Yeah, well, any kind of like validation of myself as a writer in like 10 years. Like I've had,
Really?
I shouldn't say validation.
Very external by
someone that wasn't a family or friend that read my book and said, "Oh, I liked what you read. It was good." I'm like, "Oh, okay, thanks." I'm like, "Are you just saying that like because you're my
right,
friend?"
right? Because you know them, you always
Yeah.
question that. That makes sense. That makes sense.
So, and it wasn't like it didn't go beyond that placement, but it kind of gave me that drive of like, okay, maybe I have something that I can keep building. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was when I switched from the novel approach to screenwriting.
Okay. And now that, what was the name of your very first screenplay?
That one, it was called The Perfect Filter.
The Perfect Filter. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think you've changed names a couple times.
I have. Yeah, I did change it here. Yeah.
I swear I try to pay attention, Todd.
Yeah, that's all good. My wife, when I'm trying to tell my wife
Perfect
about
Filter.
projects or
Okay,
things like
and
that, she's like, which one is this?
And then Park Dads. Was that like number 2?
Oh yes. Okay. Yeah. So that
3?
was. You know what? I think you just corrected me on my own history.
Park Dads. 5 screenplays.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So Park Dads, it just started. That was the first thing that I wrote as a script, and it was completely off-brand for me. I should say, like, off-brand as far as it was just like a buddy comedy almost.
I can see why you'd say that, but having read it and reviewed it, I was like the whole time, like, oh yeah, Todd totally wrote this.
Yeah, and I think like so it was good. Like, and it was like I had so much fun. Like, it's like a buddy dramedy, I guess you could say. And kind of felt, I don't even know if this is like totally on like the cinematic approach, but that was sort of like dabbling as well. I think I was kind of doing that one in tandem with The Perfect Filter.
Okay, so you were kind of switching off and on as you would
just
submit that story.
Yeah, and then at Park Dads, I'm like, it doesn't really seem to have like much kind of like marketability as a movie or whatever. I thought,
you get Paul Rudd in it or something. It sure looks a whole lot more
totally. And I thought, you know what? The stories here, I love these characters. I love their journey. I thought I can. So it was almost like I reverse adapted the unproduced script into a novella. And again, that one was like 120 pages. The book. So
I appreciate it. I love short stories because I have no question whether or not I'm going to be able to get through them in general if I get distracted.
Yeah.
And it was so much dialogue and so flowing. And I think that's one of the things, like, I know you've become a little more dialogue heavy. I have as well as a writer, because it's like dialogue can reveal so much. I wonder
without relying on exposition too.
I have to ask the question here on camera. How much does your love of dialogue come from Gilmore Girls?
Oh, Gilmore Girls is like the Bible. I will quote like I'll refer to like, you know, Breaking Bad and like super dark, gritty prestige drama all the time. And Gilmore Girls is like, if you want to learn about dialogue and what it means to like bring characters to life and fit so much and still make it so bingeable, like Amy Sherman-Palladino, she is like the queen of dialogue.
And it's almost like Nora Ephron, but more pop culture. Is kind of the way it hits me, because I'm rewatching Gilmore Girls now, and I have to admit, I was the cheese ball that I used to pick on my wife for watching it, and I actually watched it, and I was like, "Whoa!" Like the writing is really good, and you could take notes,
totally.
like just the dialogue and how witty and sharp and funny it is. And I think it's easy to just make those assumptions as writers. You know, as males, and we're like, oh, well, I write this genre over here. I can't learn from over there.
And Yeah, it's funny because like in my college days, like I would always have a show on while I was like working on an essay or something like that. I still am that way, like with my work, and it's generally something that I've seen before. So I always had like Gilmore's going, and like I had roommates that would just like mock me. It's like, oh, why are you watching Gilmore Girls again? And then like I hate this show, and then like
Soaking
they'd
it up.
slowly start watching, and then I remember this one guy. He's like, okay, I don't hate it like I used to, so I think I'll sit and watch this.
Right.
And then and then another roommate, he would say like, he's like, can we watch our manly show tonight? And so then he just like would join me. So anyways, yeah, it's such a I think comedy is one of the most criminally underappreciated art forms for sure. That's why I haven't attempted it that much, because like to make someone laugh and to make something funny is so hard. I'm like, you can, yeah. Anyway, so I think
you're right. Comedy is a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
And especially not slapstick, because slapstick is like, hey, that person just ran into the wall or slipped on the banana peel or whatever. Yeah, that's funny, but that's not like a intelligent funny. That's more Three Stooges, you know?
Yeah. It's not
and I'm
really
not
revealing
bashing that because I think some of that's fine, but it's not going to make you a better writer.
No,
it's not going to make you more creative. You'll be like, hey, it's like Jackass, you know, kind of thing. Whereas, you know, if you can, like, do you watch with subtitles on?
You know what? I remember you saying that, and I think I've done it a few times, not as much as I should, because I'm usually multi.
Right, you're multi into the background.
I'm horrible at like scrolling like I watch something too.
Sure.
But when you see the words, it registers.
Oh my gosh, like bells go off in my brain, and I'm like, ooh, I like, for me personally, it's like it might be an audible thing if the actor mumbles or if the EQ is a little too, you know, too much music, too much soundtrack, and not enough, you know, EQ on the voices. I feel like I'm missing stuff left and right.
And I think that was one of the biggest things for me, because like, you know, maybe you can appreciate this too, but like as a novelist, you're typically trying to make your characters speak correctly and properly, like usually complete sentences, punctuation and stuff like that.
People don't though.
No, like if we were to watch, like put subtitles on this conversation right now, we'd be saying like gonna, wanna, shoulda, those things way more. So I'm like, oh, well, why would I write everything properly and like complete in a script? And I think one of the most powerful examples for me learning that, I know that we've talked about this book endlessly, but Requiem for a Dream. Wow, yeah. Because, like that, I think there would be like pages of no paragraph breaks, no
one book I do have by me here.
There we go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like visually, it's like a wall of text.
Yeah. And those are multiple characters talking.
Absolute wall of text.
Yeah.
And the only punctuation is periods or maybe an occasional slash. Which, how often do you see a slash, Todd?
And like, what does this slash mean? What is this trying to evoke?
Right, because you know it means something when he uses it like maybe 20 times entirely in this 400-page book. Yeah, or 300-page book. And it blew my mind because you mentioned it, and I was like, I've seen the movie.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very depressing. Yes, it's like kind of watching a train wreck into, you know, a train wreck into a monsoon or something. It's just like it keeps getting worse
all at once. Yeah.
But reading that story, it changes how you approach stories. Because it's like, oh, you know, all those rules we like to follow and that all those books tell us about. It's like, whoosh, just throw them out. It comes down to good characters and a lot of conflict.
And like, it's known as like the most depressing movie to watch of all time. And some people would say like it's the best movie that I would never watch again. I have watched it a couple times. That makes me sound like a bit of a masochist there, but
a little bit.
But reading it, like I knew that like nothing good was gonna happen for these characters, but it was the first and only book I've ever cried while reading.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting if you view it through the lens of a horror movie with the addiction as a character.
Yes.
And especially with the book. I mean, you can do it with the movie as well, but Requiem for a Dream by Hubert Selby Jr., you ain't gonna find another story remotely like that. And
No.
I think it speaks with authenticity because Hubert Selby, like, he has had his massive, massive addiction struggles. If you're gonna, I think how much of this is probably, happened to him. And it's like the ultimate kind of don't do drugs story, frankly.
And I think
Or don't get addicted to different
and
things
the
in general.
movie, like the character work and the performances were incredible, and like they brought a lot of humanity to it. But I think when you're reading the book, I was rooting for them so much more in the book. Like, and it's not like I think the movie was like a phenomenal adaptation, not to lessen that work at all, but there was this, I should have referenced it, but there's one page of probably about like 2/3 through, and this is where like I broke down where it was just like a very top level look, and and I think it was like something about they were jumping from the building, hoping to escape the hell that they knew was like just waiting for them around the corner or something like that. I'm like, oh, like it's, anyways, like I could go on and on about that, but it's so that's where it was a bit of a, and maybe that's kind of where like I tried to chase the fun, but also I think what I try to make my brand as a writer is I want my stories to be cathartic, because I think if it can make you feel something, like, oh, that put me a little bit through the ringer, and that can happen in comedy just as much as drama or horror or thriller. And yeah, one of my favorite writers is Phoebe Waller-Bridge of Fleabag. And I bought the book called The Scriptures, which is basically like the collection of all 12 episodes, the scripts that she wrote for them. And she just talks about, she said, as a storyteller, I try to disarm with comedy. And then when the reader or the audience is not expecting it, that's when you stab them in the heart too, like with truth. And it almost like the being disarmed with
that
comedy.
Right moment.
Yeah. And it can be something really subtle too. So that's when I'm like, that's cathartic storytelling. And that's kind of what I
well, you're hitting the spectrum of emotions that are possible. The high highs and the low lows. I know you're writing screenplays and you're obviously very influenced by movies. Do you often find yourself wanting to read the novel after watching the show, or you find a novel and you're like, oh, there's a movie as well? Is that kind of how you approach it?
I do. Yeah. I find, if it isn't a movie that's been adapted, I usually will be drawn to read the novel after, or a short story. I think that was one that I did recently. 2 examples just of the adaptation side of thing. I think that we talked about this book as well, but I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid.
Yes, that was a few years ago.
Yeah, and that was one that like I have no context of the author or the title, but it was just, I was browsing at a bookstore and it was, like most of it wasn't like in the new release or bestsellers, but it's all like spine, and then random there'll be a cover fee. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting title.
Yeah.
And then I got it and read it, and that was one where like I finished it and like I ruined so many stories for my wife, but I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure you would not, this is too dark that you wouldn't ever want to read it, but I need to talk about start to finish.
Right. You told me like, hey, I need to talk about this book.
And then I was super stoked when Charlie Kaufman did a adaptation with Netflix that came out. I think it was fall of 2019 or 2020. And
yes.
and that was one where you kind of realize, okay, I'm not hoping for the exact same experience of the book of what it was in the movie, like trying to look at them as separate art forms. And then like Gone Girl is one of my all-time favorites.
Yes, you've always mentioned that.
Yeah,
and I think there was a little Gone Girl influence, just a little in Love or something like it.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was one, and it might have been that the author, Gillian Flynn, wrote the screenplay as well. Yeah. But as far as like, I'm like, that was one of like the truest adaptations I've seen.
Right.
So I think that it's, I don't know, I just love that it's, stories and characters can be retold in so many different ways. And that's where I think that there's part of me, like with my background as like an indie author, you are your own gatekeeper. You get the final say of like, you get your creative control, which is so
yes,
good.
stamp. Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
And that's one of the craziest, like the most eye-opening things with going on the, like I didn't pursue like querying like publishing houses for my books as much. I kind of I gave up quick on that, and I don't regret that, because I learned a lot about putting out the stories that I wanted to tell. But now with kind of going with screenwriting, like if you're trying to break into Hollywood, like you're dealing with the gatekeepers. Yeah. And if
list of gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I realize that if it does come one day where, say, I get something picked up or sold, that I'm passing over that baby and I don't have the rights to that story anymore, and what gets told on the screen or what gets rewritten with my name on it or other names on it, I'm like, you know what? It's a story that started with me. And this is going to be like someone else's, whether it's a studio or a director or the actors even, or other writers that are brought on.
Right.
I'm like, the stories, like they grow and they evolve, and then a story gets told. That's the kind of the end goal.
Yeah. Okay. Don't you feel in some ways like, at least with like a TV series, you can tell a bigger, deeper story, kind of like a novel, or, you have more chapters to tell. Whereas a movie, you cut one scene, you could be cutting, several chapters
yeah, exactly.
in one's cut. I feel like as a storyteller now, like today, 2022, it almost feels like the best way to tell a really deep story is more so in the series, which is so flexible. It could be like, when you say series, it could be like 3 or 4 episodes, or it could be 20. I mean, there's such a
it could be 10 spectrum. Seasons of 20 episodes.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think that there's such different mediums where I think that the open-endedness of a series, I think that like you get to journey a lot more and maybe grow with the characters.
Right.
But then I guess kind of the flip side of the coin is that, I think it's every writer's or storyteller's dream to have their show continue on for like a long time and get renewed.
Right.
There can be the example that, and that's where it's kind of like, oh, should this have been wrapped up? Like,
right. Or some writers leave, and then you can tell because of this massive shift.
And then and I mean, maybe there's nothing really wrong with that. It's like, if it keeps fans coming back, like I would always joke to say like, oh, Grey's Anatomy should have ended like 10 seasons ago. Then I'm like, oh my gosh, this plot twist, give me 5 more seasons and I'll watch them, and I do.
I guess part of that's whether or not it's more soap opera like, and I'm not knocking the form. I'm just saying where it's more just that continuity isn't such a big factor. It's more,
it's not a character, like a sole character's arc anymore.
Right. Whereas, like a Breaking Bad kind of thing, it's like, look, it's like, it's here, straight line, this happened, versus, a Grey's Anatomy, The Simpsons, whatever.
That can keep going.
I mean, they bring
in more sub characters or whatever.
Right. And it's such a world that they can just kind of keep going, and it's like zoom out.
And I think in other ways, I like the finality that a movie brings, and like there can be sequels. It can be like, it could be a trilogy too, where you have a. I think the Quiet Place movies did that so well with the end. I'm like, oh, I thought this was like standalone. Like this is the start of the third one that's to come, and like I hope it's to come, because it kind of whet my appetite. Like there can be the reboots and the spin-offs that keep coming too, but I think a lot of people.
What's your favorite? What do you prefer the most?
I prefer to feature standalone features,
like one-off.
Yeah.
I think there's something beautiful there, because there's no like, anything can happen in a standalone. Absolutely anything. With the sequel thing, it's at a certain point you kind of come to the conclusion, nothing big will happen that this character cannot get out of.
Yeah.
Within context, especially, I mean, if it's a long sequel, kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think that, like, I really love endings of a standalone story that doesn't wrap up completely, that leaves a bit of room for like interpretation, or because I know that drives it
Right.
drives a lot of people nuts, and I think it can be viewed.
I can see that. I
Yeah,
can
some people
totally.
might see it as like, oh, that's lazy storytelling. You're not giving me a satisfying ending. Then I'm like, but just the fact that I'm still thinking about this,
Right.
um, like one of my favorite Jordan Peele is one of my favorite filmmakers as well, and
Yeah.
Us, the second one, which I think um, there were a lot of layers to it, and then there was like the little like big twist in a very subtle way at the very end of the
Mhm.
movie. That I remember.
Are you thinking Get Out?
No, with Us, the sequel
Us.
with
Okay.
Lupita, and
Right.
but what I loved is that brought like I've watched that one probably 5 or 6 times now, because I
Wow.
keep going back, like look for more like hidden meaning and stuff. Also, like if it doesn't complete, okay, maybe that's not a good example of an ambiguous ending, because I think the twist is clear. I think good and slightly ambiguous ones are like, oh, that doesn't seem like it gave like a super clear arc to the story.
I mean,
Because
like
I know that,
Inception?
yeah, I guess,
I
and
mean, I feel like that's one of the ultimate examples where people are like
yeah,
talking about it years and years
yeah.
later, and
And I
it's like
think that
what
shows
happened?
that even on a standalone that ends and there's not a sequel, um, it's like you're getting a view of these characters and their experiences like in like a 90 to 120-minute frame,
Mhm.
but the characters live on beyond what
Right.
you see. Like they're real in my mind, like they're real, they live on. Like I talk about them with other people, I think about them. So I think that's a real beauty
That's
too.
good.
I'm just nerding out with it, but I think that, yeah, they can keep me thinking about it or wondering about it. Like I think that's very powerful storytelling.
Do you think Jordan Peele was part of your influence for writing horror?
Yeah, I think in a way that he took horror and blended it with comedy as well, but like he took like such big ideas
Mhm.
and themes that were super. I'm nowhere near that ambitious, but because he can really pull it off. But I think taking big themes and ideas and making them incredibly entertaining and
Mm.
consumable still. Um, I think there's that quote by Nathaniel Hawthorne that you and I throw around a lot, that like easy reading is damn hard writing.
So true.
Yeah. So
It's so true.
um,
Now,
yeah.
what was the name of your feature that you wrote? It was the horror story in a kind of a Walmart superstore kind
Mhm.
of thing. What was the title on that one?
The title was American Checkout,
American
and
Checkout. Oh, yeah.
the so that one is my story that has traction that I can't talk about too much at the moment, but that one has
That was
yeah, that
really your
was,
first horror, though.
yes,
Your
yeah.
dive, like, I am going all
I'm
in
going in
into
for this
horror.
genre, yeah. And that's one that I have a producer that attached himself to it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's sort of been like my first kind of bridge, and we've gone back and forth. We've like it got reimagined a lot and
Right.
expanded a lot, but it
Right.
definitely was my um that's where I say, you know what, like I'd say that was probably my more ambitious story that I was trying to,
Sure.
because I wrote it like, I'll try to keep this um as brief as I can, but um so early 2020, like
Mhm.
my wife and I, we had just moved, relocated. I was in school part time and working very, very few hours with as a freelancer, and we had a baby coming
Yep.
too.
Yep.
And then a little thing called COVID-19 happened,
Right.
and she had to go on early maternity leave. And I was like, I need to, and sorry, I'd choose a nurse as well.
Right.
So new virus out, pregnant, no
Working in the
idea. Like, well,
hospital.
yeah,
Yeah.
in a hospital, in the
Right.
hotbed of it all. So she went on like early medical leave, and no places were hiring at the time. If anything, people were losing their jobs, and I thought
Right.
I need more work, even just like a bit to help bring it in. So I got a job. I took a job at Walmart, part time, unloading trucks. Like,
Right.
never thought that would be
Right.
in my narrative, but I said, you know what, do what you got to do, and was very thankful for the like bridge of income that it
Right.
provided. But then in there, like in this big box store, like opening products, putting them on shelves, and like the world is blowing up. And then
right.
everything with George Floyd happening, like there were so many
There's a
huge,
lot going on at the exact same
there
time.
was so much
Right.
going on in the world all at once, and just trying to make sense of it all. And it kind of became my, I said, I want to try to make sense of this, the madness and everything with like the election was happening too.
It was a lot. It was like,
yeah,
it was a perfect storm in many ways there.
And it kind of became my way of, just trying to process the world around me and my own experience that I was going through.
Right.
And, I mean, hey, a Walmart job ended up leading to my first script that got attached to a producer. So, so that I don't have any more details I can share at the time.
No, that's perfect. No, that's plenty, Todd. That's plenty. I apologize interrupting you.
No, you're good. Yeah. And that
as we're talking here, I'm seeing all of these dots in your stories, and as you even talk about your stories. And first off, I really appreciate your honesty, because so many writers kind of act like, I just had this idea one day and now here's my book. But what you're doing is you're pulling the curtain back a bit, and what you're really saying is like, look, if I'm not working at that job at Walmart, dealing with boxes, I'm not writing this script. And if I, wouldn't have read Requiem for a Dream, I probably wouldn't have, written Love or something like it. And if I wouldn't have been inspired a little bit like by Gone Girl, like I think it's beautiful, because it's like, Austin Kleon's book, Steal Like an Artist. You're taking all these many influences. And I think, if I wasn't such a Gilmore Girls fan, I probably wouldn't have had this little witty comedy dialogue in Park Dads. And I'm seeing kind of like, as you're covering such a scope, you're constantly paying attention, and you're constantly absorbing new stories all the time. Even our conversation right now, if you and I send each other a funny little writing quote or something like that, like, you're a lot like me. And I think it's almost like, hey, we're detectives and we're just seeking little story ideas. And I don't really hear it much from other people saying it in that language. Like, hey, I'm just looking for story ideas. And guess what? You can write a script about, working in a big box store and turning it into a horror story. And I could do the same thing. And there might be a few similarities here or there, but there's plenty of room for your stories and my stories and
absolutely
everyone else's stories, because we're coming at it with all these other influences too. Kind of like that analogy of, an iceberg, where it's like you only see the tip poking out in the water and there's so much underneath. I think it's just fascinating, because like, we're climbing your creative family tree here is what we're really doing. It's like, you can just start piecing it out and it's like, oh, well, of course. Gillian Flynn, Gone Girl. And, this, there's, I can see where that kind of comes together. Okay. And I love the honesty, because I think we all do it. It's just whether or not we admit it.
I think that you have to really love telling stories and looking for stories, and be like, have grit to keep going, because it's, and I'm by no means the grit master with storytelling, but it's like, it's it can be very a very isolating and lonely journey to as a story. Like, obviously you can get to the end, like I love like, oh, we're interacting, we're talking about this and everything.
But during the process,
it comes with a huge, like a lifelong, never-ending supply of self-loathing too. Usually,
that's true.
And I think one of the most liberating and empowering things I ever heard was, and there's a video that you sent me. I think about this guy all the time. I cannot remember his name, so I can never go back to listen to it.
It's okay. I can probably figure it out.
Yeah, but he said, like, give yourself permission to be terrible.
Ethan Hawke.
No, it
wasn't it.
Maybe he quoted Ethan Hawke then. Yeah, it was an author. I'll figure it out probably right after we
I'm
talk.
sure.
But yeah, and then it was like, give permission to be terrible, like with your starting draft, and then you refine it and you rebuild it. And
Yeah. Oh, I bet that was Justin Warren.
yes, that's who it was.
Justin Warren.
Yeah.
I've spoke with him on the
And
he's like,
great
give
guy.
yourself permission to be absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
And he made a movie called Then There Was Joe. And it was straight out of his life about his relationship with his brother. And there was like not much sugarcoating. He was telling that story of pain, but there was also a ton of hope. And I find that inspiring too. It's like, give yourself like that bare minimum. I can be really terrible. I know I can hit that bar every day.
Yeah.
And I always found that encouraging.
And then I can make it better. And
and
it always gets better when you start
can always keep building from there. It's like that's the very lowest bar, and you can always kind of keep going.
And I think that's kind of my last thing that I'll say too. Like I feel like I kind of found like my calling and my passion in like the most exhausting phase of my life. Like as a dad of 3 young kids, like I'm like, I would love to wait for the muse to arrive and like sit down and like spend my hours. But I'm like, writing for me is like, I'm at the park. I'm like, oh, I'm going to like quickly make a notes on my phone of like something that I thought of.
Capture.
I'm just like it's sort of like the high intensity interval training of writing. It's like, I get in what I can when I can. It's terrible, but it's more than I had on the project than yesterday or when I woke up this morning. So
again, totally appreciate your honesty. And it's okay to not run a marathon every day.
Yeah.
Just to show up and do what you can do. And it's going to vary from one person to the next, obviously. And depending where you are in your stage of life, any more final parting words to other creators out there? It doesn't matter if they're novelists or screenwriters, anyone who's creating anything, needs to learn from other creators. We need that encouragement.
Yeah. Never consider watching TV or watching a show as being lazy, which I mean, that's what I always had drilled into me. Research it, figure out, look at it as storytelling research. And I know there's a lot of positivity or positive things about the habit of like write every day, but also, our bodies need rest, our minds need rest. And some of that can be like by watching, like consume
Take
stuff.
notes while you watch, right? I mean,
get inspired. Give yourself time to get inspired.
Oh, that's good. Give yourself
time.
I'm gonna that was good, Todd. I don't know if you stole it from somewhere, but it sounded amazing. Give yourself time to get inspired. That's worth repeating. Otherwise it's like you can't, produce from nothing if you have no energy, no mental energy or anything.
Absolutely.
I love that. Thank you so much. How can anyone connect with you if they are interested in picking up one of your books? Maybe they're a fellow screenwriter. How can they connect?
My most present space is on Twitter. So it's my name there, Todd Foley, Foley. So it's Todd Foley Writes. So at Todd Foley Writes. And I've got links in my bio for where my books are hosted at. And stuff about my scripts too. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Todd. I really appreciate you. Thanks
you,
so much for being on the show. And I hope that you can connect with some new creators from this.
Yeah, me too. All right.